I'm going to talk about some of the work that I've been doing in the South Pacific, where I had the privilege of working with several other consultants as well as many colleagues in Tonga on a new primary curriculum, particularly the Tongan language, mother tongue syllabus and materials. The title of the talk, as you can see, it's quite a long one, but the key word in there perhaps is new. That's the word that may intrigue you. And it's meant to be ambiguous in the sense of, so new in what sense? So new, not seen before in the world, or new in the sense of not seen before in Tonga. Now, from our point of view, it's a change from what has been practiced in Tonga up to now. So in that sense, it is new. But I'm hoping that something of what we're doing is also new in similar contexts when designing mother tongue reading courses, literacy courses. So I'm starting the declaration, and I can see that my colleague Marion Curtis is online as well, and Marion is very much of this view as well, that both of us working with our Tongan language colleagues are conscious that we are not Tongan language speakers. So this is a bit of a mystery. How can people from another part of the world who don't speak the language help in any way at all to develop materials or a syllabus for teaching mother tongue? So this is a big question. I think obviously we believe that there is some value in having specialists from another part of the world who don't speak the language because of the common approaches that do exist when teaching reading and writing, especially in alphabetical languages. So my declaration is, so I'm not a primary school teacher, that may disqualify me, not a Tongan language speaker, that may disqualify me. Before I went to Tonga, I had no experience in the South Pacific, that may disqualify me. What I am is a former secondary school teacher, editor, publisher of textbooks and children's books, and translator. I work in Arabic and French. I'm not a formal researcher either, so I'm a strange creature in the IARTEM community because I don't have an academic background. I've never written a primary school literacy textbook series before, so again, that's sort of a disqualification. So I'm probably the worst person to be doing this. But Marion and I probably share a view on this. Nevertheless, we have, I hope, contributed something to the work, and you will see what we've contributed.
So thank you. You finished.
Bye. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So briefly, the Tongan language, it's a very small country, probably more people outside the country that speak Tongan than inside the country. You can see the facts on the screen, I won't go through them, but it's quite a simple language in terms of its writing system. So that's one advantage for those coming from outside, such as me, the very, very regular spelling system. A very limited number of letters in the alphabet, as you can see. So at that level, in terms of the mechanics of learning to read, there is simplicity about it. In other ways, it is not at all simple, particularly in its figurative dimensions. What do I hope to show in this webinar? Well, about processes. So there's a process by which a foreign consultant arrives in a country to work with colleagues. So that's in itself a process. But the processes I want to look at in particular, the technical processes here, are every national curriculum document, especially when it's part of an ambitious curriculum reform, has a lot of priorities. It tries to do a lot of things at the same time. And I'm aware that even in Uzbekistan at the moment, there is a curriculum revision process going on. And of course, everybody wants something from this new curriculum process. So the result is you have a very big demand on a process And in a sense, you're trying to squeeze a lot of things into a very small space. I'm going to talk about process of planning, so how the thinking around curriculum and syllabus can be turned into a structure that is easier to understand for everybody, the thousands of people who will actually have to implement the curriculum. I'm going to talk about the process of collaborative writing. So that's how people from different parts of the world, sitting in different countries, can work together as writers. And I'm going to talk about the textbook writing spirit, because I think writing a textbook to some extent shares features with writing other things. So it's a creative process. So if it isn't a creative process, something is lost. I had a very interesting exchange with a previous presenter from one of our IARTEM webinars before, Subir Shukla. So some of you would have seen Subir talking, and he's very active online. And I found that he and I have both share a belief in common. One is that unless the writers enjoy writing it, the teachers will not enjoy teaching it, and the children will not enjoy learning it. So you've got to somehow break down this idea that writing a textbook is boring, because if it starts there boring, it's going to go on being boring to everybody else. So that's what I mean by the textbook writing spirit. My own prior knowledge and assumptions. So this is what I started with. This is what I had as somebody who'd been working in consultancy for quite a long time and interested in this area of education. What I know is that there is little research into principles of mother tongue textbook writing, whether in the global north or global south. There's research into how materials are used in the classroom, but not how they're created. I'm happy to be challenged on this if anybody would like to. A lot of studies have taken place in the global south, particularly with the support of big agencies like the World Bank and other agencies, into the teaching of phonics. This has been a kind of revolution in my experience, having worked for 25, 30 years with agencies like the World Bank. It was never like that until, let's say, roughly 2010. And now there's a lot of investment in terms of money and time by international agencies to help countries develop their approaches to phonics, so one part of literacy and therefore of textbook writing. It's difficult to define high quality textbooks. So this is the bread and butter of IARTEM. What is a high quality textbook? But actually it's very difficult to define. What's easier to talk about is high quality pedagogy, even if people will have different views on what good pedagogy consists of. But there is a lot of research in good pedagogy, into pedagogy. But then it has to be conditionized or contextualized to each cultural context and the subject itself. And the social and emotional dimensions play important roles in the teaching and learning of primary school literacy. So we're not only talking about the mechanics of decoding, we're talking about the affective dimensions of learning to read. What is it that encourages a child to make the effort, which is quite an effort in the first place, to read, to turn these symbols into meaning. And that's in addition to the decoding and the fluency and the other skills which are much easier to measure and which are often much more the focus of the international agencies. I'm going on with my prior knowledge and assumptions. If children who are learning to read in the global south have access only to textbooks, the literacy and the other textbooks, literacy textbooks and other textbooks, must therefore offer rich reading experiences. If this is the text that the child is exclusively exposed to, and they don't have access to classroom libraries or school libraries or public libraries where they can go and choose books and borrow them or sit in the library and read them, that their only exposure is to the textbook, then it is the duty of those making the textbook to make sure those texts are as engaging as possible. Children growing up in an increasingly globalized world even in South Pacific, but just as much as anywhere else, need to be aware of other cultures and want to be aware of other cultures. They're usually interested in other cultures. Textbook writers in the global South have little access to alternative literacy textbook models. It's difficult if you're sitting in a military education or in a small publishing house in the global South. How do you find examples of alternative ways of doing things? It's very difficult to find them online. They're probably in languages you don't understand. The publishers don't tend to put their materials for free online for obvious reasons. Even ministries of education don't tend to put their materials for free online. And if they do, they're not always easy to find, and they're in other languages. So you're starting without knowledge of different ways of doing things when you're a textbook writer. The final point I want to make is there has been an increasing amount. This is, again, I would say a small revolution, transformation in the online world. Now there's a lot of Creative Commons publishing for young readers in the global South, such as Pratham Books from India, their Storyweaver, which has hundreds of titles in different languages, including English, therefore very accessible to everybody, very easy to find, a very easy platform. Room to Read, which is one of the NGOs, international NGOs, has a platform called Literacy Cloud, works in different countries, particularly countries like Indonesia, Philippines, and many other countries. So these are highly engaging, professionally written. They're written with support from professional editors and illustrators, and different versions are available online, and it's all Creative Commons. So suddenly,
Bit of water.
yes, yes. So suddenly, there is now a library of resources available to textbook writers. The pedagogical approaches may not be available easily, but the literary texts, good engaging texts for children, are available, whether in English or in French or other languages. And they come from different parts of the world, but that in itself isn't a bad thing. Next, I would like to acknowledge, and I do hope Marion is still online. She's in the photo here. So first of all, my Tongan language colleagues who are 12 hours ahead of Paris time, so therefore they are not able to attend. With the former team leader Anna Luca-Loy and the current team leader Eleni Takaifanga. My fellow consultant Marion in Australia, therefore 9 hours ahead, but amazingly was with us at least beforehand. My colleagues in NISM, which is an organization that I helped to found with Margaret Sinclair, who I think is still online with us, which looks at social and emotional learning in educational materials. And then wonderful researcher called Hetty Bakunen at the University of South Pacific in Tonga. So Marion and I make occasional visits to Tonga, 2 short visits per year. The rest of our work is remote, so it's through Zoom meetings. So we're working sort of around a table, as it were, but remote. So the background to the work, here are the dates. The important one here is that as of this week, in fact today, the first materials went into the schools. So it's quite a big day for everybody. And I'm sure there were problems, but we hope most of the kids did receive their new materials, even in the outer islands. And it's funded by the World Bank. So what is the new approach? Here are, I would say, the key points. There are lots of new things. It is organized around values and 21st century skills. That was in the title of the webinar for a good reason. Partly because the values play a very important part in the education strategy, but also in society as a whole. And that was an important priority for us to reflect that. 21st century skills, which are in every new curriculum document to any country in the world at the moment. Controversial to some extent, but always present. We have an integrated approach, which is that listening, speaking, reading, writing, grammar, and vocabulary, spelling, and punctuation are always supporting each other. It's a pupil-centered approach, and by this I don't mean that it's not a teacher-centered approach. I'm a firm believer that these two things are not opposites. Pupil-centered does not mean not teacher-centered. And I would say that where you're giving, trying to give children autonomy in learning, you need to give teachers autonomy in teaching. So teacher-centered means teachers having autonomy. It doesn't mean teacher having a lecture and just talking. That's not teacher-centered. That's a distortion of the idea. Oracy is the basis for reading and writing. So you will see the materials, how they develop from oral work through reading through to writing in an integrated way. You will see pupil collaboration leading to independent work. It's not group work. Occasionally it is. It's more often pair work. This recognizes teachers' comfort zones, what they're happy to do. It also recognizes classroom layout, how children are sitting in the classroom, but it also recognizes the value of interaction with your partner, being able to share without fear of getting something wrong, and then you come up with something which is a joint response, and you have a chance to speak and turn what you say into what you are then going to write. There are rich texts for reading, which we just talked about, the Creative Commons from Literacy Cloud, from Pratt & Story Weaver, and from other sources. These are texts that tell good stories or present information in engaging ways. They're not dull. It develops both lower and higher order comprehension skills. We looked at various international assessment tests, looking at how PEARLS, how the Pacific Regional Assessment is organized, called PILNA. What kind of questions are they asking children of this age about comprehension? The approach is about meaning-based writing, so it's not mechanically responding, it's not getting something right or wrong, it's about having some autonomy, being able to respond in a way that makes meaning to you as a child. And it's about being metacognitive, which means different things to different people. In the approach that you will see, it's about having for children to have enough of an idea of what they're trying to do in order to know whether they have done it. So at the beginning, there is something like, what am I learning? And then at the end, how have I done? So that's the metacognition. Thank you. 21st century skills. They are an important part of the curriculum framework. The framework was in place before we arrived to start our work. Our work as consultants working with our colleagues was to develop a syllabus for the subject areas, 4 subject areas. We did Tonga language, science, mathematics, and English as an additional language. Framework was already there. The framework said 21st century skills are core of this approach. And here are the skills which are listed in the curriculum, in the national curriculum framework. So you can see already how many strands, how many things you have to reflect when you're trying to develop a particular subject approach to reflect all of these 21st century skills. And one of the things that I want to suggest is that when you find that competency-based approaches in different countries are always described as being knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, which is a very common formula for defining a competency-based approach. It's always in that sequence. It's always knowledge, skills, attitudes, values. And it doesn't say so, but it almost suggests that knowledge comes first, then you can develop skills, and that leads to attitudes, and finally you end up with some values, which is a strange idea, really, when you think about it. But it's almost an implicit assumption that they are a sequence, because they're always presented in the same sequence, and people sometimes write them, KSAV. This is KSAV. I'm sure I know it's different in French, but I mean that's in the English-speaking world, that's often how it is. I wouldn't suggest that we turn it around the other way and have a different sequence of VASK, but I would suggest that we don't see them as a sequence. And you will see that we use the values and attitudes and the 21st century skills as a way of organizing the approach. So we worked on class 5 and 6 to start with. If you want to know why, you can ask me later. Next, we will do classes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the ones that are in the school at the moment, classes 5 and 6. Each class, each grade, consists of 8 units, and you can see from the slide the themes of the units. So these are the titles and the themes. So treating others well, problem solving, health work, sweet memories. That's about relationship between children and their grandparents and ancestors. A magical tree, that's basically about the coconut tree, because it is used for everything in Tonga in all sorts of ways. My story, that's about people learning to tell their story, who they are, how they describe themselves. Plants and the environment, and then look to the future. That's about sustainability and resilience. Across the 4 subjects that we're doing, it was agreed that we would have something called a connected curriculum. So that Unit 3, which is health, Unit 7, which is the environment, you will find a similar theme in mathematics, in science, and in English, in Unit 3 and Unit 7. So it's not identical, and one doesn't depend on the other, but it means that in that time in school, everybody's talking about personal health, and then everybody's talking about environment issues. And particularly in the South Pacific, there are lots of environment issues to deal with. There are also lots of health issues to deal with. In brackets, I've written some of the 21st century skills that are embedded within those units. And the same for class 6. And we are going to look particularly at Unit 6 of class 6. So we have compassion, we have difficult to believe, that's very much about critical thinking, as you can imagine. Traditional medicine, because it's Unit 3. Telling a story. Tongan artists, so that's about basket making and carving, using local materials in a local artistic tradition, but it's about the artists as much as about the art. So there is a sort of personal connection always. Pause, think, which is the unit we're going to look at, very much about critical thinking. And then there's heroes of the environment. So there's lots of different environmental heroes that in different countries, which can be celebrated, and their story makes a great literary text. And then poetry is a part of life. So here is something about Tongan poetry and Tongan poets. So we're going to look particularly at that unit about critical thinking. Critical thinking is always found in any list of 21st century skills. And it's probably of interest to lots of people in this room. It is problematic, obviously, for all sorts of reasons. Because of the word critical, firstly, being critical can mean different things. And some governments don't like the idea of critical, because that's not what governments do. But critical thinking is clearly of growing importance. We're surrounded by misleading and lies. And children are exposed to that, especially by the end of primary school in any country. Disinformation. We are challenged by the idea of what critical thinking means in different subject areas. So to some extent, it's relatively easy to think about it in mother tongue and literacy, but it may mean something different in mathematics and in science. But if it's going to have a meaning, it has to have some overlap with the other subject areas. So that's one of the essential discussions that have to take place at the beginning of this process, that these 21st century skills have to have enough in common to make sense as a skill that is cutting across the curriculum, but they also have to have enough that is distinctive in that subject. So that's an interesting discussion and quite a difficult one sometimes. How do government published textbooks engage with critical thinking? Especially in a country where, this is the only textbook. This is a small country, therefore it's the government that publishes a textbook. There's no choice of textbooks. So that's a challenge in itself. Within the area of literacy, critical thinking relates very strongly to thinking about text. So critical, so what kind of text am I reading? What is this writer saying? How is this text organized? What is the relationship between illustrations and text and the other parts of the page? So when you see captions and labels and things like that, all of these are part of text genres which actually relate to some extent to critical thinking. It's being able to get behind that page and say, why does this page look like it does? It's a similar question to, why is this writer saying this? Why is this writer trying to deceive me? Do I trust this writer? All these questions are all linked in the sense of critical thinking. And then big question at the end, in a country where there are no bookshops, school libraries are very limited, just a few books in the corner of the room, the classroom, very few public libraries. And many countries have similar resource challenges. So without access to fiction, whether it's independent, whether children are reading independently or it's being read to them in the class or by their parents, how do pupils know how to think about fiction? And even, is there a distinct word for fiction? Because we talk about, tales and, folk tales and different ways of talking about stories. But fiction, at least in the word in English, has a distinctive characteristic, which is related to, publishers and bookshops and libraries, and that's the fiction section. And that means, fiction means that we start thinking about the text in a certain way. But how does a child or how does a teacher think about fiction, think about imaginative writing? If you have a folk tale which embodies culture and everybody knows it and everybody sort of believes in it as almost like a canonical text. So, but it's imaginative, it's imaginary rather, so you want to believe in it as a cultural product, but at the same time it's something you have to critically engage with because it's not true. And the children should not believe that it is true. It's part of heritage. So it's true in that sense, it's true heritage, but it's not true that these things did not happen. So this is where literacy textbooks have a different part to play. Here we get down to the structure of the unit. So unit 6, 3 topics. And that's how every unit is structured. It's quite a regular format, and that's for a reason. It makes it easier to write, for example. It makes it easier to teach, and even for the pupils, they know where they are. It doesn't mean it's dull. It doesn't mean it's monotonous. Each unit takes roughly a week to a week and a half. Doesn't have to take a precise number of lessons, but it's designed to take roughly that amount of time. And each topic follows a sort of template. And you'll see that there are 5 stages. Start with this. That's something that teachers were used to in the previous curriculum, so they like that. It's a sort of, it's where you engage with the theme, where everybody has a chance to speak about the theme. Explore the text, build your language knowledge and skills, apply your learning, that's where the writing particularly comes in, and then review the outcome. And each topic also includes homework. And here we are looking at a spread, a double-page spread, left-hand page, right-hand page. The first 2 pages of Class 6, Unit 6. And the heading, title of the unit is Pause, Think. So again, it's very much about what do we do when we're thinking critically. We don't immediately think we understand this. We have to say, is this exactly what I think it is? Or should I think again? And topic 1 is called The Amazing Tree Octopus. So on the right, you can see, you won't be able to read it, but you will have the slides later. It's a text about a tree octopus. There is no such thing as a tree octopus. So the point here is it's a fantastic text about an exciting creature that doesn't exist. But it's presented, as you can see, the genre, it's nicely laid out, got illustrations, they look real, they look like photographs, but it's not true. So we are actually saying to the child, this is an example of a text that is not true. And we're going to see why is it not true? How is it not true? We're not going to say why have we put this in this textbook. We could say that as well. But it's important to us that this was accepted as being part of a ministry published textbook, but actually saying we're going to look at a text that is not true and we're going to see why it's not true. So disinformation, this overlaps with fact and fiction. You can see that in these 2 pages, and we're going to look at the following pages next. So it starts with part A, which is start with this. It moves to part B, which is explore the text. And then after the following pages, we'll have parts C, D, and E. Start with this is very much the oral element. So it's about open discussion. It's about children having the freedom to say what they want to say. The questions are not there to be answered in writing. They're meant to be discussed. Teachers can guide that discussion. And you can see that there are some examples of imaginary headlines. That a survey finds that ice cream is an important part of a balanced diet. So you, as a teacher, you say, well, that's an interesting finding, isn't it? That would be lovely if that was true, wouldn't it? So as a teacher, you can start to lead the discussion. Is that likely to be a true headline? Giant rats found on the moon. Now, some children may never have thought about what is on the moon at all. They may have no idea what's on the moon. So they may think, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm interested to know more about these giant rats. And the tortoise that lived for almost 200 years, that's actually true. But to many children, all of these will be equally true or equally untrue. So it's for the teacher to lead that discussion as to what is true here and how do we arrive at an idea of whether it's true or not, and how should we pause and then make up our minds. And then we come to the text about the octopus. Now this text is not from Storyweaver or from Literacy Cloud, but it is one of the Creative Commons texts. So we have permission to use this, including the illustrations. It was published in English. By the way, this is all the prototype in English before it was translated into Tonga or adapted into Tonga. So the textbooks are in Tonga. And this text will be in Tongan language. The following 2 pages, you can see that we move to the 3rd stage, which is build your language knowledge and skills. The activities are not actually placed there. They were written after this prototype was developed. So they are about Tongan language, vocabulary, grammar. There is an activity about antonyms or opposites based on the text that they've just read about the tree octopus. There is some punctuation work. So it's about the mechanics of language. That's stage C. Stage D is apply your learning. And here is where they are led to discuss. These are actual facts about octopuses. So based on these actual facts, how do we then go back to the text that we just read about the tree octopus to know what the tree octopus text, where it was lying and where it was true? And then on the right hand side, you can see that they will complete a table where they have identified what are true and what parts are not true. Underneath the table, they write a report. They will write a report based on write a short analysis of the tree octopus text, include the following points. You might say that the text about the tree octopus is an informational text, but now you know that the information is not true. Why do you think the author wrote it? It's also a persuasive text, but you now know, but you should not do what it asks you to do. Why not? Because it's actually raising, it actually says, save the tree octopus. So it doesn't actually have a link to send money, but it's what is designed to sort of send money to save the tree octopus. And if you're not sure the information in the text is true, how do you check? How can you check? And the final thing at the bottom of the right-hand side is what we call the success criteria. So this is the metacognition. This is the self-directed learning, which is one of the 21st century skills. So we introduce those at the beginning. You can see the box at the top right on the left-hand page, which has the success criteria, and it says I can describe the type and purpose of text. And there's 2 other points there. So there's 3 simple self-checks that they can start with and then end with at the end by saying whether they feel they've made good progress or they needed help, or whether they really are struggling still. And that will be through show of hands, and then for the teacher to follow up and say, well, you know, the teacher will have to find their own way to support those children. Here is the text online if you want to look at it, the actual text that we borrowed from about the tree octopus. So what literacy skills is this topic taught? It's taught oracy skills, there's discussion, and that involves respectful listening, respectful commenting. It's about reading an extended text, responding in writing to a text, describing the type of text, describing the purpose of a text, writing a short report on the text, writing a short report on research. That's the homework that they did. They had to ask their parents or their family members, is there anything that you used to believe and now you don't believe it? And what happened? How did you change? So that's the child's homework, is to find a report, is to do a little report on who has changed their mind and how did they change their mind. So that's a short report about research, and then punctuation and vocabulary skills. So these are the literacy skills, and these are not only taught in this topic, of course, they will be repeated in other topics. But that's the literacy, that's the language content, or literacy content. And what are the 21st century skills that this topic is taught? Critical thinking, that was the explicit focus of this topic. Collaboration, a lot of that. Information literacy, global awareness, because the topic is set in Northwest Pacific, which is North America, actually. So it's the Pacific, but it's a long way from Tonga. Self-direction, that's the self-judging, self-evaluation, success criteria, and thinking skills. And then what have I learned from this process? So I've been this is, well, we're in January, it's 15 months since we made our first visit. I've learned that each subject has its own characteristics. Content, skills, and progression in mother tongue literacy work differently from other subjects. This is a big topic which we could discuss if you'd like to know more. Marion and I have had lots of discussion about this with our colleagues. A simple topic structure can help to weave diverse elements together in a textbook and make the writers and the teachers' work easier. So this is where you move from this very complex interwoven group of priorities to something that is more manageable and simple because the textbook has organized it. The typical elements of a competency-based approach, knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, do not indicate a sequence. Values and attitudes can help to create a framework for planning a literacy textbook. And remote collaboration, which is what most of our work has been so far, can work, but developing writing skills is even more gradual, that means slow, when collaborating remotely compared to face-to-face, because face-to-face is always better. It's that emotional relationship that means you can actually learn more easily from somebody than when you're thousands of miles away from them. And I think I have reached the end on time. Lots of reading if you'd like to read it. You'll get a copy of these, then you can follow the links. And we'll conclude with a lovely sunset from the beach in Tonga. And that's a lot of the coastline in Tonga looks just like that, by the way.
Thank you.